Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the story of John Kennedy and the murder of Mary Ann Kennedy in Seghill in 1903. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. As this will be my last video before New Year, I would also like to wish everyone all the best for 2024. There is very little information about the earlier life of John Kennedy. In 1903, it was said that he was around 21 years old, so he would have been born in around 1882. His parents were John and Frances, and he was one of at least 9 children, and he worked as a miner at Seghill colliery. He was described as being a quiet, sober kind of man. He had been married for less than a year and lived with his wife's parents in Barras Row in Seghill. Mary Ann Kennedy, the victim, was 17 at the time of her death in 1903. She was born in around 1886 in Ersden to parents Mary and George, and she had at least one sister and one brother. In 1901, it was said that she was a dressmaking apprentice, and she married John Kennedy in the spring of 1903. She was already pregnant at the time of their marriage, as their daughter was born in around October of 1903. John's wages as a miner was not, in his words, enough to be able to afford a home of their own, so this was why the couple had decided to live with Mary Ann's parents. However, this was perhaps not the best choice for the couple, as far as John was concerned, as he felt that he did not get on well with her parents, more especially her mother, who he felt treated him unfairly, and he had even left their home once or twice, but had always gone back, as he stated he loved his wife and did not want to live without her. On the morning of November the 12th, 1903, in Barras Row, everything seemed to be fine. The couple had not argued in any way, and Mary Ann was doing household chores with her mother, while John was sleeping in the kitchen. He awoke at around 9:30 a.m. and went upstairs. To reach the upstairs rooms of the home required the use of a ladder which was positioned in the kitchen. He came back downstairs a short while later, then asked Mary Ann to go upstairs and fetch him some writing paper, which she did. A few moments later he asked her to go upstairs again, this time to fetch his razor. Although she could not understand why he could not have got this himself, she still did as he asked. It was at this point that Mary Ann's mother left the kitchen to go to an outside water tap. While outside, she heard the sound of gunshots, which she felt came from her house. She rushed back inside, and finding no one in the kitchen, she climbed up the ladder. On reaching the top, she saw John holding Mary Ann, who was lying on the floor. She spoke to him only to say, "You have shot my bairn." For those who don't know, bairn simply means child, and John replied by telling her to get back down the stairs. She ran to a neighbour's house to raise the alarm. She then heard another gunshot, and then another. It would be the neighbours who were the first to enter the house, a man by the name of James Graham being the first inside, and the sight that met him upstairs greatly upset him. He went in with the parish nurse of Seghill, Blanche Austin, and on looking at the couple, she saw that John was lying over his wife, clutching her left arm. She had first believed that Mary Ann was dead, but she then noticed some signs of life. She asked for the doctor to be sent for, but before he could arrive, Mary Ann died. Blanche then attempted to treat the wounds of John Kennedy, but he said he wanted to be left alone to die with his wife. Dr. Anderson arrived at the house a very short time later. On entering the upstairs room, he realised immediately that Mary Ann was already dead. She had been shot in the head at least twice, and her throat had also been cut, he believed, with a razor. He noted that John also had a 3-inch wound to his neck, but he did not believe it to be dangerous. He also had 2 gunshot wounds to his head. He felt these had not penetrated the brain, and that although he was seriously ill, he did not feel his injuries were life-threatening. PC Blythe arrived just as Dr. Anderson was carrying the body of Mary Ann down the ladder. He immediately went upstairs, where he found John with 2 wounds to his head and a razor cut to his neck. PC Blythe then charged him with the wilful murder of Mary Ann. He did not reply to the charge. Because John Kennedy was not seriously hurt and it was expected that he would recover well, he was taken to the Tynemouth Workhouse Infirmary, where he would be watched over by a policeman at all times until the inquest and trial. The inquest was opened at the Mining Institute in Seghill. George Athey said that he had identified the body as that of his daughter Mary Ann, who was 17 years old. It was then stated that John would not be well enough to attend the inquest for a further 2 weeks, when it was hoped he would have recovered well from his injuries, and to also allow the police to gather together any further evidence, it was agreed to adjourn the inquest until the end of November. The funeral of Mary Ann Kennedy took place on November the 15th, 1903. It was said that large crowds lined the road from her home in Barras Row to Seghill churchyard. It was estimated that around 7,000 people were present, and the police at times had to clear a way to allow the hearse and mourning coaches to pass by. Seghill Church, I believe, would be Holy Trinity Church, which was opened in 1849. The service was conducted by the Reverend Seddon and the Reverend Abbott. It was said that James Graham, who had been the first to find the body of Mary Ann, had been overcome with grief inside the church and had to be helped to his home. The service was said to have moved many of the mourners to tears. I did not find any details of a headstone for Mary Ann. To add to the tragedy, on the very same day of the funeral, the christening of John and Mary Ann's daughter took place. It had already been arranged prior to Mary Ann's death. It was stated that many of those who had attended the funeral also attended the christening, and their daughter was to be named Mary Ann, the same as her mother. The inquest reopened in late November as planned at the Mining Institute in Seghill. However, John was still not well enough to attend, but it was felt better to continue rather than to adjourn it a second time. Mary Athey said that Mary Ann Kennedy was her daughter. She said that the couple had lived with herself and her husband at their home in Barras Row. She said that she believed the couple were on good terms. She had seen no arguments between them on the morning of the murder. John had asked Mary Ann to go upstairs for him twice, and she said Mary Ann had asked her why he could not go upstairs himself, and she had told her just to do as he had asked. She had not worried about leaving them in the house together alone, but when she heard the sounds of what she believed to be gunshots, she had ran quickly back to the house, and on seeing the couple lying on the floor upstairs, she had immediately gone for help. When asked, she said that John had been a little sulky that morning, but other than that he appeared to be in his usual good health in her opinion. James Graham said he had been one of the first people in the house. He said he had noticed the blood-stained razor in John's hand. He had asked John what he had done with the revolver, and he told him he had thrown it away. He then told him that he loved his wife. James said he had replied, "How can you say that when you have done such a cruel thing?" But John did not reply to this. Blanche Austin said she was the parish nurse at Seghill. She said she had not been called to the house but had been in the area at the time. She had seen a large crowd around the house, and with Mr. Graham she had gone inside and upstairs, where she found both Mary Ann and John lying on the floor. She said Mary Ann had still been alive when she arrived, but had died just a few moments later. She had been the one to send for the doctor. She had asked John what he had done, and he said he had shot himself. She tried to attend to his wounds, but he did not want her to. He said he wanted to die with his wife. She still tried to help him, but he resisted and said to her, "I want to die with her. It's not Mary Ann's fault. I have nothing against her. It is her mother." He then asked Mr. Graham if Mary Ann was dead, and he told him that she was. When the doctor arrived, John told him, "I believe they are going to christen the bairn today, and they are not going to ask my mother. It has been leading to this for a long time. He did not say anything else after this. P.C. Blythe said on arriving at the house he found John with a serious wound to his neck and 2 gunshot wounds to his head. He charged him with the murder of his wife, but John did not speak to him. Dr. Anderson had handed him a revolver and a razor, and on searching the room he found 28 cartridges for the gun in a drawer in a box. He found a large pool of blood by the window and marks on the floor from the gunshots. Later that day, John's mother gave him a letter which had been written by John. The letter had told his father to get some of his possessions from the house and to also collect his pay from the colliery. It had been written on the morning of the murder and had been delivered to his parents' house by Mary Ann's sister. P.C. Blythe went on to say that later that day he spoke again with John Kennedy, and at this point John had told him, "I have my senses now more than when I did it. My wife's mother had nearly driven me wrong in my mind. I have had nothing to eat for 2 days, and I did not know where I was. They have been spiteful to me. They planned the christening and did not want my mother to attend." The following day he made a further statement, this time stating that he had fallen down the stairs a week earlier and his head had not felt right since. He also said that his mother-in-law made him leave the house many times, but he had always gone back as he could not live without his wife. Dr. Anderson said that he and Dr. Miller had performed the post-mortem on Mary Ann Kennedy. The wound to her neck had been very deep and death had been due to blood loss from this wound. The bullet wounds to her head had been serious as they had reached the brain, but he did not believe they would have caused death as quickly as the wound to her neck. The jury at the inquest then retired for around 15 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty of willful murder against John Kennedy, and he was committed for trial. Shortly after the inquest, John Kennedy was brought before the magistrates at North Shields. It was stated that since the murder, John had been suffering with signs of insanity and did not seem to be aware of the seriousness of the crime he had been charged with. Dr. Bramwell, who had been looking after him since his arrest, stated that earlier that morning he had spoken with John and explained to him that his wife had been shot and had died. He told him that it was believed that he had committed the crime. John had seemed surprised at this, had burst into tears and said, "Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I didn't know anything about it." Dr. Bramwell said he was aware that John had been told previously of his wife's death. The trial took place in February of 1904, although it is not stated, it is most likely that it was held at the Moot Hall in Newcastle. John was said to be neatly dressed in a grey suit and appeared to be calm and quiet. He pleaded not guilty and was allowed to sit for the duration of the trial. Mary Athy gave the same evidence as she had done at the inquest, only adding that she had never seen John hit her daughter. They seemed to get on well. John seemed very fond of Mary Ann. She said it was not true that he had not eaten. He always had his meals at her house, and despite what he had said, he had had a good meal the night before the murder took place. She did not feel that she had ever treated him in a spiteful manner. Blanche Austin, Dr. Anderson and P.C. Blythe all gave the same evidence as they had done at the inquest. Ellen Shotton said that Mary Ann was her niece. She said that John had visited her recently and told her that he was looking for a house. He said if Mary Ann would not move with him, he would sell his few belongings and find other lodgings. She claimed that he also showed her the revolver and said that he would do for Mary Ann. She said she had told him, "Oh John, you couldn't." It is not stated if she took him seriously or not, but she did not seem to warn anyone that he had a gun. And she also said that he had jumped out at her one night on a footpath near his home. He was wearing his night clothes over his day clothes and seemed to be behaving oddly. To me, this seems to be very strange behaviour, but no one seemed to think that John needed to see a doctor. Ernest Atkinson said he worked for Mr. Watson the gunsmiths in Clayton Street in Newcastle. He said that John had visited the shop in September of 1903 and had bought a box of cartridges for a revolver, and he did not state any reason for buying them. Jacob Mendelsohn of Newcastle said he believed he had sold a revolver similar to the one produced at the trial to a man similar to John Kennedy. However, when asked, he said he could not be sure if the gun was the one he sold, nor could he be sure if John was the man he sold it to. The defence stated his evidence was not worth considering as he clearly did not know anything. The defence then stated that he felt the burden of this case very keenly. It was for him to show the jury that John, when committing this crime, was suffering from a mental derangement, which meant he was not responsible for his actions in the eyes of the law. He would call witnesses who would testify to the state of mind of John Kennedy. John Kennedy Sr. said the prisoner was his son. He said he had at one time been a volunteer at Tynemouth Garrison and was used to using revolvers. He claimed he had noticed a change in his son just 3 weeks after he married Mary Ann. He said he seemed low-spirited and often complained of pains in his head. The night before the murder, John had visited him at his home, and although he had spoken to him at least 3 times to ask how he was, he had not replied. His eyes seemed to be staring out of his head. He had eventually told him that Mary Athy was driving him mad, and he did not know if he was walking on his head or his feet. When asked, he confirmed that there had been insanity in the family. A cousin and his own father's sister had both died in an asylum. He said other members of his family had also spent time in asylums. Jack Kennedy was said to be a relation who had recently been released as cured. The prosecution pointed out that this man claimed to be no relation. However, John Sr. stated that he had been happy to be a relation to his family until John Jr. had killed someone. Mrs. Kennedy said the prisoner was her son. She also felt that he had, in her words, fallen back since his marriage. She said he had become untidy in his appearance and seemed to be discontented. She found it hard to get him to speak to her whenever he had visited. He seemed to feel that there were problems between himself and Mary Ann's parents. Robert Kennedy said that John was his brother. He also felt he had not been in his right mind since his marriage to Mary Ann, and John Ridge, a miner who had worked with John, said he had noticed a change in him and he was quite convinced that he was mad. However, neither of these last 2 witnesses gave any real examples of why they believed John to be suffering from insanity. It was stated at both the inquest and the trial that John had wanted to die. He did not want to live without his wife, and John Kennedy did not give any evidence on his own behalf. The judge, in summing up, stated it was for the jury to decide if John had been in his right mind when he had committed this most dreadful crime against his young wife. He stated that to legally find him suffering from insanity, he must have not known when he committed the crime that it was murder. If, however, they felt he did know what he was doing was wrong, then he was guilty of murder. The jury retired for only 10 minutes, and on their return, they stated that John Kennedy had indeed been the one who had killed his wife, but they believed that he had been insane at the time he did it. The judge then stated that John would be sent to a criminal lunatic asylum for the rest of his life. John did not respond to any of this and was removed from the dock. I did not find any details of where John was sent to, but it would be unlikely to be anywhere local to where he lived. John and Mary Ann's daughter could be found in 1911 still living in Barras Row with her grandparents. I did not find any details for her after this. This was a very sad and tragic story. John, it seems, did show some signs of insanity, believing that his mother-in-law was starving him and treating him unkindly. His family had also noticed changes in him, but it seems neither his wife or her mother had noticed anything unusual in his behaviour, nor did they seem to think he needed to see a doctor, and sadly this resulted in him taking the life of his young wife and leaving their poor baby daughter without her mother and father. I do believe the outcome of this trial was the correct one. I don't believe he truly knew what he was doing and did not deserve to be hanged. But what do you think? Do you think the jury got it right, or do you think he should have been hanged? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this very sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again very soon.